So eventually Andy will be able to overcome some of the threat that the other prisoners threaten him with. Um, they are described by Red as jackals, and Andy is like their prey. So he uses sort of animalistic imagery here to convey the behaviors of some men uh, within this environment. And then I think we do get a sense of characterization of Andy's determination and the way that he is able to fight back. He never gives up hope that he can overcome this obstacle. And this is what Red says on page 36. He always fought them, that's what I remember. He knew, I guess, that if you let them have at you even once without fighting, it got that much easier to let them have their way without fighting next time. So Andy would turn up with bruises on his face every once in a while, and there was the matter of 2 broken fingers 6 or 8 months after Diamond's beating. He always fought back, and as a result he did his time in solitary, but I don't think solitary was the hardship for Andy that it was for some men. He got along with himself. And then in 1950 events happen which again stop this violence almost completely. So Andy's character, we see his fight and determination to overcome obstacles such as this one, and he uses his intelligence. There was that part that I was talking about. He says he's aware of the threat that the men are sort of asking him to perform a sort of sexual act. And then he says, you should know that a serious sudden brain injury causes the victim to simultaneously urinate, defecate, and bite down. So he uses his intelligence, in this case, to outsmart Boggs and get out of this situation. And then he uses his intelligence in terms of his background. He's a banker. So he, more than some other men, as Red says, is a man who understands better than the rest of us the ways in which money can become power, and he bribes the guards to beat Boggs. So it is also interesting to note that, Red doesn't know for sure that these events happen this way. This is just what he's heard. So this is the sense where we get that Red as a narrator is a reflection of the prison environment where hearsay and gossip and rumor and almost like myths, the way they spread. It's all part of that prison community and the communication system amongst the men. So Andy's story, his almost sort of myth-making personality, I guess, the specialness that he sort of seems to embody is all part of his reputation within Shawshank. So even though Andy has to deal with so much of this hardship alone for the first years of Shawshank, he eventually does become very close friends with Red, who is our narrator. Red says on page 25, it had taken us 7 years for us to progress from nodding acquaintances to fairly close friends. And we can sort of think about some of the stages of their friendship and what occurred to sort of consolidate their friendship. The first action seems to be when Andy first talks to Red about getting a rock hammer. So this is on page 28. He asks Red if he can get him this rock hammer. And Red is well aware that Andy has this reputation, and he could understand, he says, with words like those, I could understand how he had gotten a reputation for being the snobby sort, the kind of guy who likes to put on airs, but I sensed a tiny thread of humor in his question. So even Red sort of makes up his own mind about Andy's personality and sees that there's more to him than just being a cold or snobby person. He has this sort of hidden sense of self that comes out, his sense of humor and the qualities that are more inside for Andy. And then in this scene, Andy explains that he's a rock hound. He had this hobby in his previous life outside the prison, where he collected and polished rocks. And he noticed that the exercise yard, there are rocks that can be sort of cleaned up and, polished into a nice ornament. And then there's this exchange he has with Red where they think about, or they look at the rocks in the yard, and Red identifies one as quartz. And this seems to have an effect on Red. So quartz had given my heart a funny tweak. I don't know exactly why, just an association with the outside world, I suppose. You didn't think of such things in terms of the yard. Quartz was something you picked out of a small, quick-running stream. So just this little hint or glimpse that Andy brings to Red's life at this moment gives him a sort of a reminder. It's a little reminder of the outside world for Red, and it makes him feel good. So it seems as if Andy will have this kind of presence within Red's life. It'll remind him, he'll continue to try to remind Red of the outside world, and in this way sort of help him avoid the internal or institutionalization that affects the prisoners. And he also, at a later point, asks Red for rock blankets. So those are just the polishing cloths used to turn the old rocks of the exercise yard into polished stones. And then eventually, 5 months later, he will ask Red for a poster of Rita Hayworth. And at this point, we get a funny exchange where they discuss the presence of pinups within the prison walls, the cells of the men. So a large part of Red's business, his sort of contraband black market business, is to get posters for the prisoners. And Red gets Andy this poster of Rita Hayworth, and he wants the big one. And the posters themselves have a lot of sort of symbolic value for the prisoners. Of course, they're beautiful women, but at the same time, they're also a reminder of, or symbols of, their outside life. So they are a reminder of freedom. And Red sort of describes the prison environment on page 38. And as he talks about his business, that there are sort of some opportunities for the men to sort of maintain their grasp or their hint of their previous lives, and through posters and other contraband that comes in, this is a small part of how the men are sort of able to maneuver around the strict norms and rules of the prison system. And he says they live with it because they know that a prison is like a big pressure cooker and they have to be vents somewhere to let off steam. They make the occasional bust, but I've done time in solitary time or 3 over the years. And when it's something like posters, they wink, live and let live. So the guards and the warden, they allow little tiny gestures of the men to sort of have these vents where they can let off steam. You know, a poster here or there is not going to hurt anybody, so they allow that as long as the men are, the rest of their behavior is sort of conforming with the prison system. But there is still a sense, we get the poster up and then the description on the bottom of page 38, the picture of Rita Hayworth hanging over Andy's cell. And then in the bright morning sunlight, there were dark slashes across her face, the shadow of the bars on his single cell window against the poster. So we have a sort of symbolic element there. The woman, Rita Hayworth, as a sort of symbol of freedom, and then the slashes of the cell across the poster, illustrating the circumstance of their incarceration and the contrast between freedom and restraint. So Andy and Red's relationship, their friendship, gradually grows into something meaningful. On page 39, Red is describing how Andy and I were on fair speaking terms by then. The guy fascinated me. Looking back to the poster episode, I could see there is one thing I neglected to tell you, and maybe I should. 5 weeks after he hung up Rita, Ernie passed me a small white box through the bars of my cell. From Dufresne, he said. And then inside the box, Andy had given Red polished pieces of quartz. And Red says, I looked for a long time. For a few minutes, it was like I didn't even dare touch them. They were so pretty. There's a crying shortage of pretty things in the slam, and the real pity of it is that a lot of men don't even seem to miss them. There were 2 pieces of quartz in that box, both of them carefully polished. They had been chipped into driftwood shapes. There were little sparkles of iron pyrites in them like flecks of gold. If they hadn't been so heavy, they would have served as a fine pair of men's cufflinks. They were that close to being a match set. How much work went into creating those 2 pieces, hours and hours after lights out. I knew that. First the chipping and shaping, and then the almost endless polishing and finishing with those rock blankets. Looking at them, I felt the warmth of any man or woman feels when he or she is looking at something pretty, something that has been worked and made. That's the thing that really separates us from the animals, I think. And I felt something else too, a sense of awe for that man's brutal persistence. But I never knew just how persistent Andy Dufresne could be until much later. So we get another glimpse at Andy's character, his persistence, his brute persistence, and the fact that Andy gifts Red with this gift, the 2 pieces of quartz that are polished and they've become beautiful. And this again is a reminder of the outside world for Red. So it's something that he holds in high esteem, high regard, and almost a sense of awe, right? And he says it's too easy for men in the prison to sort of ignore pretty things because you get so sort of immersed within the prison system, and any sense of beauty or hope or whatever is lost on these men who are become sort of so ingrained within their incarceration that they cannot see anything beautiful anymore, or that life is worth living in some cases. But here is Andy's gift to Red, the pieces of polished quartz, and this will become sort of an important part of their friendship. So here's just a picture of a rock hammer and some polished quartz, so you can get a sense of the 2 objects that sort of are the first indication of a relationship between Red and Andy. And remember that idea of rocks being a sort of symbolic element, a reflection of Andy and Red within the book itself. So Red also sort of acknowledges that his description, so he's talking now about his narration of Andy and these circumstances, and he sort of describes how Andy almost seems larger than life, and he's more of a legend than a man. So this is what he says on page 39. You may have noticed much of what I've told you already is hearsay. Someone saw something and told me, and I told you. Well, in some cases I've simplified it more than it really was, and have repeated or will repeat 4th or 5th hand information. That's the way it is here. The grapevine is very real, and you have to get used to it if you're going to stay ahead. Also, of course, you have to know how to pick out the grains of truth from the chaff of lies, rumors, and wish-it-had-beens. You may also have gotten the idea that I'm describing somebody who's more legend than man. I would have to agree that there's some truth to that. To us long-timers who knew Andy over a space of years, there was an element of fantasy to him, a sense almost of myth magic, if you know what I mean. So